Welcome to our March edition of our Coaches and Professionals program panel podcast. So, like I was saying before we hopped on here, this topic is something that I think is super important for this program as a whole, for our mission as a whole. And I think it's something that is not talked about enough for sure. And it's how to prioritize your mental health as coaches and professionals. So, we do a lot for our student athletes and we look out for our student athletes' mental health, but are we looking after our own? So, definitely excited to have this conversation today. So Cynthia and Lauren, if you'd like to introduce yourselves. Lauren, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lauren Sander. I am an assistant athletic trainer at James Madison University. I've been there for 6 years, and my role is providing healthcare for our student athletes. And on top of that, I have taken an interest in mental health programming, education, awareness, mostly coming from the student athletes, needing things, wanting things. So I've just been trying to find where the needs are and fill them.
Cindy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Cynthia Miller, and I am currently a licensed mental health counselor in the states of Indiana and North Carolina. And that came to be because I was a volleyball coach for 6 years prior to that at Winthrop University and East Carolina University. And got to the point where I realized I could no longer serve the athletes with what they were coming in for, and they couldn't get access with their schedules and such to kind of a outpatient or the student health services. And so this is kind of my MO in life, is when there's a problem, I try to fix it. So I went back to school and became a therapist. And now I also work with athletes and groups on things like burnout and work ethic and how to kind of navigate mental health and how those things go about. So it's where a lot of my passion for this work comes in. Is I was an athlete, I was a coach, and now I get to be an outsider looking in.
Perfect. Well, like I said, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you both. I guess we'll kick it off with the kind of broad question. Why do you think it's important for coaches and professionals within the athletic field to prioritize their mental health? So, Cindy, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so I think that coaches, for the majority of them, I know there are a few that did not play or were not athletes. I think there's a big story right now. One of the men's coaches in the Final Four was a manager, did not play, and so just it's not everybody, but majority. And I said that I think mental health is something that's never talked about in athletics from an early on state. I think that we're moving in the right direction, but if we look at historically how, if coaches were once athletes, it's kind of they do unto others as they've done to themselves, kind of a pattern, a cycle that happens. And recognizing that your own mental health impacts your athletes, I think is a really important step of like accountability and responsibility that you have to take care of yourself. So not only for your own well-being, but also how it can permeate and infiltrate into your team dynamic, your coaching staff, and prioritizing mental health for coaches is really about finding what I think is the most important thing, is time to do it.
Completely agreed there. And I love what you said about kind of like the coaching cycle and how you kind of take what you were taught from your coach, and it's that whole kind of cycle of hand me down almost of a coaching philosophy or what you kind of learned as a coach. Um, and definitely you can see where mental health lies in that. And something that has been interesting for us to look at has been like generationally, you have certain coaches that value it or maybe place more emphasis on it than others. And like you said, I think we're definitely coming to a better spot with that. And I love how you mentioned that it's not talked about early on. It's more of a reactive sometimes than a proactive approach. So Lauren, we had kind of touched on the NCAA coaches well-being survey. What were your biggest takeaways from that you think our community should be aware of?
I think it was just so interesting. First of all, I'm so glad we asked those questions. I think the NCAA does their best, and I think we all try to do our best to ask the student athletes what they're struggling with, what they're dealing with, how can we improve, what can we do better. But as I've experienced, I feel like the coaches and support staff often get left out of that question and left out of that conversation. And as the people trying to provide the support for the student athletes, how can we model what we don't do for ourselves? So I think the biggest takeaway for me was just seeing how many coaches felt mentally exhausted, felt overwhelmed by all they had to do, experienced sleep difficulties, and it was pretty shocking. One of the coolest things in there is they do separate it out by generation, and the younger generations of coaches are having significantly higher experiences that they're struggling with. And I think that speaks to what you said, like the ones who came before them didn't model those skills, didn't talk about it, didn't teach them what to do. And so they just expect to grind and grind and grind and do what they've always seen done. And it's wearing on them. So I hope that this isn't the first time we ask these questions, and I hope that we can repeat this study and take what we've learned from it and actually try to maybe start implementing some policies, some procedures, some programming targeted towards our coaches and professionals and not just the student athletes.
I think you made a really good point there, along with the like we all try to do our best, and how do we model something that we're preaching to our athletes when we don't have the support to do that? I think that's a phenomenal point. So then what are some common ways that you both either have experienced or seen coaches or professionals not prioritizing their mental health because of their job? What are some kind of typical things that you see that may be glorified as part of the grind, like we just mentioned, that maybe aren't beneficial towards their mental health? Cindy, if you want to hop in.
I'll jump on. I was expanding my screen and it unmuted me. So I will go. I personally slept in my office on like early morning trips. And let me tell you what a committed person you are. What a wow, you must really care about your athletes to make sure they're there first. And meanwhile, it was because one, Lauren, I did not know about the sleep part. So I saw some of the studies coming out. I slept horribly as an assistant volleyball coach. I felt like anytime we had early morning practice or anything, I still had that like angsty feeling of even when I was an athlete, right? Punishment for lateness and timeliness, like all of these expectations. And so I think one is that grind of hours put in. And I think one thing that we're moving towards as a whole society is this idea that we can get more things done and be more efficient. We don't need to work an 8-hour job if we can get it done in 4, like this sort of thing. And I think that may be where some younger coaches are like burning out quicker because they're like, wait, I just have to sit in my office. I have nothing to do. Or like adding extra work or busy work or this sort of thing. Because if you're not in the office before your head coach, or if you're not the last one to leave, Lauren, looking at you, athletic trainers are there 2 hours before everyone else, right? Like this grind and this expectation of overworking leads to burnout. And when I think of, the other aspects that go into it is like, no, I can't, I have this, or no, I like starting to turn down other things in life. So a lot of coaches who get burnout, athletic staff in and of themselves, it's oftentimes because they're not making time for anything other than their sport. And we could do our favorite thing in the whole wide world 24 hours a day and we would get tired of it. So even if you love your job, that's what I think a lot of people don't know about burnout is you can love your job and still be suffering from burnout. Like those are two things that can be true at the same time.
I think that's such an important point, because I've even had conversation with friends who may be, battling burnout, and they're like, "Yeah, but I still love it." And a lot of people would see it on the outside and go, "But why do you do this to yourself?" And like you said, there is that still that love beneath it all. And I really like 2 points that you made, on the expectation of overworking and on the kind of lack of setting boundaries, like work-life boundaries. And I think that's something that that is super important and that needs to be talked about more. And I've talked to some friends in coaching, and we've talked about boundaries that we set, and it's a really hard thing to do. I think especially as coaches, because you know you want to be there for your athletes, but at what cost almost? Or how available are you going to be for your athletes? Is that going to be 24/7? Because like you just said, if you love something but you do it 24/7 and don't have any other balance, it's not sustainable. So I think that was a really good point that you made. Lauren, has there been anything that you've seen from the athletic training side that you would say?
Mary, I'm going to interject just to follow up with what you just said of like the work life of 24/7. I tell people this all of the time when I'm talking to athletic department folks, anybody that works in sport, is I worked in a high level residential treatment facility when I first got out of grad school as a therapist. I was on call. I had an on-call phone once a week for a month. I was less stressed in that moment than on the weekends when I was coaching because I was on 24/7. If my athletes called somebody, it was going to be me. It was going to be like the assistant that wasn't going to yell at them, that was going to come pick them up from a party or like whatever the thing may be. And so I wanted to follow up with like how much I noticed that lack of boundaries with the athletes and being kind of at their service at all times.
I think boundaries are so huge. I remember we had our counseling center liaison for athletics come to a staff meeting once, and she just answered some questions and was there as a resource for us to kind of talk through some cases. And it doesn't feel so profound now, but at the time you would have thought she told us the cure for cancer. She literally said, like, if a student athlete texts you after 9 o'clock and it is not an emergency, you do not have to answer that text message. Like, or insert time here, whatever it is for you, unless it's an emergency, or if you can assess safety quickly and they're safe and it can wait until tomorrow, you do not have to answer that. You do not have to answer that phone call. You do not have to answer that text message, and it is okay. And I think for some people it's still sinking in, but we were flabbergasted. um, Especially after the last couple of years. I feel like it's just been 24/7. If you're not there to answer a question, if you're not there to pick up the phone, if somebody needs something and you can't be there for them right in the moment, it almost feels like you're failing that person. At least from the sports medicine side of things, it's like, oh, we're the fixers, we're the problem solvers, we're the ones who are supposed to make it all better. And if we can't figure it out right now, then it feels like, oh, well, we're not doing everything we possibly can, which is totally not true. Um, the interesting thing about boundaries that I've learned is that once you set it, it's not that big of a deal. I feel like student athletes almost have more respect for you if you can set boundaries, because it doesn't only hold you accountable, it holds them accountable, and it gives them structure, and they like structure. All they know is structure. And it just, sometimes if you can do it early on and you can stick to it, it's good for them. It's good for both of you, because then you're not so stressed out worrying and waiting and wondering if you should have answered that text or should have answered that call. They know you're not going to, you know you're not going to, and you're going to talk about it in the morning, and it's going to be okay. I think, kind of going backwards a little bit, one thing that I've noticed, especially on the sports medicine side of things, is it's not just the long hours. Like, I was talking about this earlier with my fiance, who's also an athletic trainer. Like, I could work a track meet all day long, and like, to see a kid who came back from a really tough injury, and like maybe it's the 10K, it's the last race, it's 10 p.m. and they cross the finish line, they feel great, they're so happy. That 13-hour day, totally worth it. But the sitting in your office, twiddling your thumbs, the unfulfilling, dissatisfying long hours for no reason, where you're just there because you feel like you have to be there, that needs to be a thing of the past. I feel like I'm glad the younger generation is starting to recognize these patterns as unhelpful, so that we can be more efficient with our work and more intentional with our work, because that's where you find that fulfillment. That's where you find that satisfaction, is when you can be intentional with your time. And our student athletes see that. They know when you're there because you want to be there, not because you feel like you have to be.
I love that distinction. And I love that you said, once you set a boundary, it's not a big deal. Because I think a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of coaches and a lot of professionals and people in athletics, um, there's always that expectation, like you were saying, that we're there for our athletes all the time. And setting that boundary, I think, is more than half the battle, honestly. Like I've had friends who could talk about boundaries for days, and we have the right ideas, but then they don't set them because they're nervous to not be there for their athletes, or they're nervous that something will happen. Um, so I think that's really important. And I love what you said about the structure part of it, how student athletes are kind of creatures of structure, and they have their calendar, and they have, all of these structured kind of systems in place, and how those boundaries can help lead to that structure in the same way. So next kind of question, Cindy, this is perfect for you. What is burnout? What does burnout look like? I feel like it's a term that we throw around a lot. But what does it actually look like in reality versus what we see kind of floating around?
Yeah, so I think I come off of the definition that Emily Nagoski makes from the book Burnout. She defines it in like 3 pillars, and she talks about the first one being emotional exhaustion. And that's what people usually notice first, right? Emotional exhaustion is this fatigue that's not physical. You're not necessarily physically tired or haven't like exerted yourself physically to notice it, but it's this noticing of maybe you're hitting your alarm 5, 6, 7 times. Maybe you want to take a nap in the middle of the day under your desk. I definitely used to do that. Put a little in a meeting sign on my door, boundaries, pulled that door shut. I'll put it in my calendar, meeting with myself, just nobody knew. But emotional exhaustion is, I think that she even phrases it as like caring too much for too long without any like reciprocation. So like putting in all of this effort. And then the second component is depersonalization. And this is where I really started to notice my burnout was like I didn't care. I started to not care and really about my athletes in the sense of like competitiveness. I have played sports my entire life. I will kick all your butts in life and like game, not just the whole world life, the game. I picked a bad one to give the example of. Like I'm very competitive, and I just didn't care anymore. I just had like this sense of almost apathy, and I lost a lot of my like caring and compassion. I can remember a situation where like the team wasn't listening to me, and so I just like tossed the itineraries that I'd worked on for 10 hours prior, just tossed them on the floor. And one of them came up and they're like, "You've never thrown anything." And personally I was like, I didn't throw it, I was like trying to defend myself. um but like thinking about it, I was like, I just didn't care in that moment to like wait till they were finished and that sort of thing. And I'm like, I am an empathetic human. There's something going on that I am having this disconnect. And then third component is a decreased sense of accomplishment, where everything you do doesn't seem to matter. You put in all these long hours, and you're not getting the feedback maybe from internally, you're not feeling like this job is rewarding anymore. And it just is this like really empty place of that, like whatever you're doing isn't going to make a difference anyway. And I think that's a really hard thing because, some of the coaches in my life were some of the most impactful people that I ever have come in contact with. And to know that there are lots of coaches who are experiencing burnout and this lack of empathy and lack of compassion, and then also lack of drive, like what's the point kind of situation. All of those are like the definition of burnout. And I think that it shows up a lot in the way in which you like catch yourself talking to your colleagues, or if it is that place of like that very apathetic what's the point, or I don't even care. It's time to start to reflect on how can you either heal from this, make changes, set boundaries, create space, or maybe it's time to step away for a little bit. And sometimes that's the ultimate way to heal from burnout, and you can come back too. But yeah.
I love the three pillars that you set out. I feel like that's a super easy way to digest burnout and kind of look at it and go, okay, is this me? Is this not me? The boundaries part of it, we were talking, and it's so difficult to make those boundaries and kind of set those boundaries. So if someone's going through burnout, and this is kind of rising into our next topic, some ways to prevent burnout, avoid burnout. How do you kind of balance, and this is a question for both of you, how would you kind of balance, okay, I think I may be burning out, but these boundaries are so hard to set. I don't know if I can do this. How would you, what is a first step, an easy first step that you would take if you think that you're dealing with burnout? Lauren, if you want to kick us off.
I feel like in my own personal experience, my first step, which is the wrong step, was to be in denial about it and be like, nah, can't be me. Like, no way. It's just this week. This week was hard. Like, next week will be better. So the first real step is just being able to acknowledge it and identify it and sit with yourself for a second and say, okay, this might be what's happening here. And not overanalyze it, but just kind of take a step back and maybe look at the last period of time. Maybe it's a few weeks, a few months, and just kind of look at what's different, what's changed. Is it your expectations of yourself? Is it expectations from those around you? Is it the actual schedule that you have, or what's going on? Maybe try to look at it from a practical point of view and see where things started to get lost. And then I'm a talker. I like to talk things out. I like to process out loud. And so find someone you trust and find someone who can understand your situation and what you're going through, and just say, hey, I don't know if you feel the same way, or I just feel like the last few weeks have been really hard, or maybe even say like, I feel like my last few weeks have been hard. How about you? And just kind of go back and forth with that person. And who knows, maybe you're not alone in that situation. And you can kind of process out loud, like, oh, this is what I've been feeling. Maybe they feel that way too. And you can validate each other's experience. And maybe you can figure out, okay, where's this coming from? What I'm feeling is real, validating yourself, and just kind of taking the opportunity to sit with that for a little while and recognize and decide that you want to do something about it. Because that's kind of like you were saying, Cindy, the apathy that comes with it. I feel like that's the hardest part, is where you're like, I do care. I know that I'm supposed to care. I know that part of me somewhere deep down inside of me cares, but I want to find that person again. I want to get back to there. And so making that decision that you want to figure out what's best for you, or that you want to make a change, and that's okay. And let yourself explore those opportunities. Maybe it's just looking at a job board, and not that you're going to up and leave tomorrow, but give yourself the possibility of a new opportunity. Give yourself the chance to look at, okay, what would it look like if I tried this? Or what would it look like? What would it feel like if I used this strategy, if I set this boundary, and see how that makes you feel? Run that by someone. Let them tell you it's not crazy if you don't answer your phone after 10 p.m. And just kind of take that opportunity to see what that would look like in real life for you, and what makes sense for you. I think that's the other big thing, is finding what works for you in the situation that you're in. What works for the athletic trainer with football is not going to work for me as the athletic trainer with volleyball. We have two different coaching styles. We have two different schedules, two different expectations, two different personalities, and so figuring out what works for you, what you need, what your needs are, and then going from there.
And I think your point with the apathy part of it is huge. And I was just going to add on, I think Cindy, the first part that you touched about, the emotional exhaustion and the apathy together, are so hard to kind of overcome. Like we were saying, the two play kind of hand in hand, I feel, or, so that's kind of an interesting kind of note, that I feel like that's why it's so difficult to sometimes overcome it, in that sense. So we've talked about burnout and kind of acknowledging it, what it is. So what are some healthy boundaries? We talked about the texting boundaries. But what are some other healthy boundaries that we can set as coaches and professionals to maintain a healthy work-life balance? Because I think work-life balance is a term that's thrown around, but it's difficult to kind of obtain, especially in a profession that is so not 9 to 5, if that makes sense. So Cindy, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, one of my as the in the profession that I do now, I have to say, hey coaches, get yourself a therapist because we are starting to encourage that for our athletes. And I think that we're still in this place of like, yeah, but I don't need it. Yeah, but I'll figure it out. Yeah, but I don't have time. And I tell people that if you don't have time for something that's going to better your life, you probably need to make time for it, or that means you need to make time for it, you know. I think that comes from like a Buddhist phrase. It's like everybody should meditate for 15 minutes. And if you can't find the time, you need to do it for an hour. This like very intention to finding time to focus on your own well-being and have the space to learn to vent to someone who doesn't get it. I think that there can be such a healthy balance of seeking validation. And I know that some coaches like love the grind, even if like at least they verbalize that they do. I don't know what's going on inside. But then if you're like, oh my gosh, this week has really sucked, and they're like, what? Why? It's been the greatest week ever. I've worked 700 hours. Like, then you're like, oh, am I failing somehow, or am I not cut out for this, or that sort of thing. So, seeking out a therapist, um, and then when we're thinking about boundaries, and I think that is a boundary because I think that throughout your work week, there needs to be times for lunches that are outside of athletics. If you have a bestie in the athletic department, cool. But maybe make a boundary or a policy of like no talking about work while we're eating lunch. You know, start to change your thoughts around if I'm not thinking about work, then I'm not working hard enough. Because we all know this too. You get home, you pull out the laptop to look at film, or you go scroll through your phone, see if you missed any emails or text messages. So when you're at work for 8 to 10 hours a day, and then you come home and work for 2 to 3 to 4 more, you're never really taking a break. Um, Other boundaries, I think I come from an assistant coach lens. I think that if I were to get back into coaching, I'd have a hell of a lot better of a time because I'm better at setting boundaries now. So I think as assistant coaches, setting boundaries of when you're off and be off. I have talked to so many assistants, even head coaches that go on vacation and never once put their phone down. That's not vacation. You're not getting the rest that you need. Or at funerals, at weddings, like fixing someone's problem, like Lauren was talking about being the fixers, like being able to shut off your role, taking off your coaching hat to being a human, right? This is a phrase that's being picked up for athletes all the time. Like you're a human first and then an athlete, right? You're more than an athlete. Okay, coaches, you're more than a coach. You are a human first and then a coach. The coach is what you do. And so I think texting boundaries, phone call boundaries, work boundaries, if you can leave your laptop at home, do it. If you know, sometimes that's not possible. But there's going to be times where you sprinkle in, if you've got 2 back-to-back away weekends, you might have to work a little bit more that week, right? Or those 2 weeks versus when you can take time off, really pushing yourself to take that time off and give yourself, you know, even if it's 15 minutes in the middle of the day to turn your phone off or do not disturb, a little mindfulness meditation, a little walk around the complex, like whatever it may be, but doing it for you and not because you think that you should. Because I think that's another boundary too. A lot of coaches do make time to like work out, but I also think that that is intertwined with like I have to look a certain way, I have to be a certain way, I have to all these things, not because it's for their mental health or to escape from like the daily grind.
I think your last point is a really good point. And I also love the point that you made about the fact that if we're not thinking about work all the time, that doesn't mean that we're not working hard enough. I love that point. I don't know what else to say about that other than I love it so much. Lauren, is there anything you'd add to healthy ways for coaches and professionals to have that work-life balance?
The only thing I'll add is just practice what you preach. I listen to our coach tell the athletes every single day our 4 pillars of recovery: hydrate, fuel, sleep, and clear mind. And I wonder, okay, are you doing all those things too? And I believe that she is, but I feel like we have become the experts at telling people how to do better, be better, perform better, live better, be healthier, all these things. But do we actually take our own advice? Do we actually sit down, look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, yes, I did. I literally said to my fiance, I said, I had 3 meals today. And he was like, what? And that should not be a big deal. But just really taking a second to look at like the most basic of basic self-care. Like, have I slept enough today? Have I had enough to eat? Did I drink some water? Like, treat yourself like your most favorite houseplant, you know? And have I found a chance to either connect or disconnect for the day, whether it's disconnecting from work or connecting with someone that makes me feel like a human and remind me that I'm a human.
I love that easy kind of phrase you ended with of have I had a chance to connect or disconnect? I'm stealing that, just warning you.
All yours.
So perfect. So next kind of question or topic that we're going to go into is athletic departments and how to integrate this kind of thinking into an entire athletic department. So we could all say, coaches' mental health matters and we need to prioritize it. How do we integrate that into an entire athletic department and administration and support staff? So what are some strategies that the both of you would kind of recommend for athletic departments to put in place to show this commitment and prioritize the mental health of not only student athletes, but coaches and professionals? So Lauren, if you want to kick this off.
I think it starts with listening to the voices of the staff. Like, ask the questions and then answer and listen while you're at it. So asking them what they need and then finding a way to actually provide that and give that to the staff. It also starts at the top. So if your athletic director is telling you, yeah, we care about you guys, but is questioning why you're not in your office or questioning why you're not doing things a certain way, then that's not true. That's not good leadership. I love our athletic director. He sends an email all the time, like right at the end of the semester. And he was like, remember, we are done at noon on Fridays. Make sure you guys take a break. The season is over. The semester is over. Like, take time for yourselves, recharge. This is end of semester, before breaks, all the things. And you know that he means it. So it starts at the top. Be intentional with your messaging, be intentional with what you're communicating, not just through your words, but through your own actions and through your expectations of your employees. And then honestly, it comes to staffing. Like, we need to have enough people to get the jobs done. So the cycle doesn't end if there's always work to be done, or there aren't enough people to effectively get done what needs to be done, whether that's enough athletic trainers to provide quality health care for student athletes, not just coverage, whether that's more than one coach on staff to take care of all of the things necessary to plan training sessions, schedule itineraries, get travel taken care of, like all the things that you guys do, all the hats that you wear. And then support staff. We need enough people to take care of the people that we say we care about. So it not just saying, oh, we have a counseling center on campus, and then we're sitting in our offices counseling a student athlete because there aren't enough support systems for that student athlete. We need to know our scope, practice within our scope, be supportive, be good humans, but have enough people surrounding us, have a good team, an integrated team that can actually care for the people we're all really here for, the student athlete.
Cindy, what would you say are some strategies that the athletic department could integrate?
I have lots of opinions on this. I personally, I think that when Lauren was talking about like the top down, I think that a lot of coaches get to a place of burnout because they are trying to please their athletes and they're trying to please their athletic department. And it can feel like very much like a lose-lose. And so one of my like concrete wishes in athletics and college athletics is that all head coaches have multi-year contracts. Again, I'm putting that into the universe, knowing full well that that is not likely. However, I think that it's a really important component of like trust in the people above you, that they aren't going to just get rid of you after one bad year or that sort of thing. I think that our perspective on student athletes, on college athletes, is really skewed. I actually find it very weird that we glorify and make celebrities out of 18 to 22-year-old humans, solely because they're still developing and their winning and losing really isn't in their grasp, like we, society and fans, like put it on. It comes to the coach, which then comes to the athletic director. And so first and foremost, that's like my most concrete thing of what I think would help a lot, because if a coach feels secure, they are going to have less likely burnout, and they're going to be able to take chances and take risks on maybe athletes that they wouldn't, or lineups that they wouldn't, or whatever it may be. And then I also think that athletic departments, we have student athlete advisory committees at most all schools, and there is not that for coaches. And I think that mentorship is something that's really, really, it's on a more like association level. Like for volleyball, I know that the AVCA has a mentorship program, but it's not specific to universities in my experience. If someone has one, I would love to hear about it, and I'd love to see the model so we can implement it elsewhere, because there isn't a mentorship program like there is like SAC. And I think that could be really helpful to having more seasoned coaches tell new coaches like, oh yeah, it's totally normal to do this, this, and this, or to mess up. Oh yeah, I didn't turn in my lineup one game and we all laughed about it, 2 months later. Like everybody was mad at me until, right? But I think a mentorship program would be really helpful too. And then also, just like we are starting to bring in counselors, therapists for the athletes. I know at East Carolina, it was a person from the student center, but she had hours, like 2 days a week. She was over on the athletic department. So it was almost like drop-in style, or like it was more easily accessible. And I think that should be available to coaches as well. Not a necessarily like a regular therapy session weekly. Again, I think that's still important, but maybe stuff that's like, I just need to get this out right now. I have a little bit of Ted Lasso going on in my brain, and I love the setup there, just in just a random office. Come in when you've got something going on. But I think that a mentorship program, mental health support, and then I know most athletic departments do like a monthly all staff meeting. And I can remember in my 6 years at ECU, I think one had to do with mental health, and it was about mental health for the athletes. So incorporating it as more of like almost a curriculum, I think could be really helpful too.
I have one thing I wanted to add. I think another important thing is finding opportunities to connect within and throughout the department. I feel like a lot of times we can get so locked into just our one sport program, or the one section of the department that we operate in, and we lose our empathy for one another, and we lose the perspective that we can gain from just connecting with people throughout the department. Like, it's a grind for everyone. And while we have unique challenges, we can connect on the foundation of what those challenges are. Like, you're not in this alone, you're in it together. And if you can see that in another person and have that be seen in you, then that's helpful within itself. We did an exercise with a speaker one time, and it was like an all staff thing, and it was an anonymous thing where people were just sending in on their phones like things that they were struggling with, and you'd have no idea like the things that people had put up there and how many people were struggling with a lot of the same things. And we haven't done something like that in a really long time, and I wish we have. But just remembering, once again, practicing what we preach. We want the athletes to connect with one another, but we have to connect with one another on that human level.
I love all of those things that you both just said. The connectivity, the kind of mentorship, I think is definitely, I love that point that you made, Cindy, about how it's at an association level, not really at an athletic department or institutional level. And just kind of all the trust factors that go into building that as a department, not only as a staff of a single sport program, like you were saying, Lauren. So then what are some tips that you would give to coaches to kind of walk this walk, like we've been saying, to help their student athletes with their mental health that can also help themselves? So I know I have a lot of friends who use different kind of methods to help student athletes, but are they doing those things for themselves? So are there any ideas that you both have that coaches and staffs could put in place that can also apply to themselves and they can hold themselves accountable with that? Lauren, if you want to start.
One thing that our team started doing this year was connects is what we call them. And it's a 10-minute meeting. And it started out as athlete to athlete. And it was just every week they would be assigned a different person and they had to schedule a 10-minute meeting to connect with that athlete. And then actually I got it wrong. It was a group of athletes and a coach. So it was like A, B, C, and then group A had to schedule a meeting with the coach, head coach, and then group B was assistant coach. And so what we started doing is about halfway through the fall semester, me and my coach were talking about it, and I was like, I feel like things are a little weird on the team right now. Maybe we should make the connects with each other. And so we would alternate weeks. One week was coaches, the next week was connecting with each other. And then the spring semester, it's gone even bigger than that. It's one week you have a connect with another athlete. The next week you have a connect with a coach and or a support staff member. So me, academic advisor, strength and conditioning coach. And what that does is it disperses it a little bit more, but it also gives more people an opportunity to connect with each other throughout the semester. And it's 10 minutes. So it could be like a pop in on your way to class, or just maybe you come 10 minutes before a lift and you're talking to your strength coach. And the goal is like, you can talk about sports if you want to, but the goal is to really just find a way to connect just a little bit deeper with that person. Maybe that's an opportunity you have to bring something up that's bothering you, or an opportunity like you just took an exam and it was really hard and you're really like just totally exhausted from all the studying you did. And this is just like your safe place for 10 minutes. And I love that because it's so much less informal than like a check-in, like, hey, come check in with me in my office 3 times in this month. And it's more authentic. It builds that trust that we were talking about, because it's not just one person being singled out. This is an expectation of everybody. It's not, oh, I think you're having a hard time, so I'm going to make you do more. I'm going to make you check in with me 5 times this week or 5 times next week. It's, hey, maybe use your connect meeting as an opportunity to bring that up. Or, hey, let's get to know each other on a different level, a little bit more of a human level. So I think that's one thing I've seen work kind of well. And I really have liked it so far. But just the other thing I'll add is being human and letting them see you be a human. Like, I love when my coaches bring their kids to practice, because they're not just like the person who said something mean to them that day. It's, oh, she's a mom, and like, look at her, like loving up on her kid right now. And that's just so awesome. Or when I bring my dog to work sometimes, because it's like, look at this everyone loves dogs. But just being a human to people, treating them like humans, and then letting them see you as a human. And I think that just, it creates something between you that is just so much more genuine.
Cindy, I feel like you mentioned before the mindfulness part of it. Is there anything you would say in terms of mindfulness or breath work that could be integrated? Because Lauren, I love the idea of the connects. Again, I think I might steal that. But in terms of breath work and mindfulness, Cindy, is there anything you'd suggest?
I think that a part of mindfulness in practice and workouts in any of these things, there's a lot of visualization and such that there's a lot of research on, and coming into each space gives you, and I have utilized like the language of like, when you walk through the door, pick your bucket. So if there's a trash can around, if there's something, and everything that you've experienced that day goes in that bucket. And for the next 2 hours, your brain is on your sport. Not because the rest of it's not important, because this is the one space that you get to utilize this as a release. And if there is something going on that's maybe harder than that, it's really hard to put in that bucket or that trash can for the 2 hours that you're at practice, it needs to be discussed beforehand, right? Because a coach is not a mind reader, and a coach does not know that because your shoulders are slumped that something really horrible happened today. Because you might have your shoulders slumped 5 out of the 6 days at practice because it's at 5 a.m. and you don't want to be there, right? So your body language could convey very similarly. And so I think having a, and we've called it like reset word or mantra, things like that. I think having one of those for practice as a team, maybe that's something that you decide to do before the season starts, before games, before practice. Maybe those are different, depending, but having something where there's intention and mindfulness around it. And mindfulness, again, is simply being in the present moment. A lot of people think of mindfulness or meditation as like, I have to like, sit with my legs crossed and for 30 minutes. And how can anybody do this? You can be mindful for moments, for breaths. And I think collective breathing is really something that's really powerful it's actually like scientific with mirroring. If you are breathing heavy or like deeply, the person across from you is going to be like, should I be doing that too? Like, they will start to emulate that. I also think that mirroring is so important. We've been talking about like coaches' mental health throughout this, and I will say this over and over again. If you do have a therapist, talk about it. Not about what you're saying in the session, but like if you're coming to practice and you were just in a therapy session from 1:30 to 2:30 and it's 3:30, like, oh, I came by your office. Oh, I was at therapy. Like on Wednesdays, I'm at therapy from 2:30 to 3:30. Start to normalize, or whatever time I said, start to normalize that discussion, because I cannot tell you how many athletes I've heard, I don't need to come see you. I'm not crazy. It's not that bad. It's no big, like, I'm fine. Nobody else does. Like everybody asks like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? And if we start to verbally normalize that experience, you are going to help your student athletes without physically doing it, right? You're not the one sitting in there as their interim therapist because they can't get into student health. Because that's another thing, is as long as your athlete is safe, stay in your lane. And that's not like a cocky because I can do it better, but because how much time is that taking up of your brain space and your like that you can't manage, right? Like, or don't need to manage. Like if somebody is coming into your office every single day with lots and lots and lots of drama or struggles or emotional issues or like, mental health struggles, at some point set that boundary we talked about and refer them out. They're going to get better care, and you are going to be able to watch their progress and their support versus trying to help them and trying to fix things when that may not be within your power, your capability.
I'm going to quote you on that. As long as your athlete is safe, stay in your lane. I love that. And I love what you talked about with mindfulness, as being in the present moment. Like you were saying, I know sometimes athletes can get, they don't want to lay down for 5 minutes and do a mindfulness exercise, but like for softball, we tell them, okay, take 2 deep breaths before you go up to the plate. Like fix your eyes on something and really just focus in on that thing. And that's really helped them kind of ground themselves before they go into this high pressure situation. So like you were saying, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but in smaller chunks, it can make a big difference. So to kind of wrap up here, do you guys have anything that you want to add first off to this conversation? Anything that we didn't touch on?
I just want to overemphasize the normality, the normalcy. I make up words sometimes and just roll with it. The normalcy of feeling burnout. We know that it is like 30% of people experience burnout from like a physiological standpoint, where you're actually like your cortisol levels are high. Like if you went and got your blood drawn, it would show high levels of stress and high levels of like electrolytes and like imbalances and such. So the normalcy, and that's what I hope people gain from listening to this. But I recently had someone tell me, I was doing a podcast last week. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal or something you have to deal with. Like, so the common thread of everyone complaining, everyone feeling burnout, everyone struggling with connecting, all of these things just because it's common doesn't mean it's how it should be. And I think that is like oftentimes athletes in particular, oh, you have 7 scrapes and you've had 2 knee injury, like, right there's almost like this competitive of like, how bad do we have it? And coaches do the same and do the same. So yeah.
I say that I use that with my student athletes all the time. When they ask me if something's normal, I'm like, well, I see it a lot, but no, it's not normal. Or like, yes, this is a common thing to experience, but no, it's not normal. We should work on that. I think the only thing I'd add to that is just burnout or just feeling like you're really struggling. It is not unrecoverable. It is absolutely something that can be reversed and turned around and will ebb and flow. Like maybe you're in a rough place and you find your way out of it, and then you're right back there the next in season or another phase of your career, your life. Like it's okay. You haven't failed. You didn't do anything wrong. It's not your fault that you got back there. It's just another chance for you to take a look in the mirror and figure out, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to change? What can I fix? So just recognizing it's not the end of the world. If you find yourself in this place, you're definitely not alone. And it's something that you can turn around and you can make a change, and just be gentle with yourself through that process.
I love both of those points that you guys made about burnout and kind of the language we use with common and normal. And the word that I thought about when we talk about normal is, just because it's common doesn't mean that it is healthy. And I love that Lauren, you touched on how it's not unrecoverable, but you'll have your days, you'll have your moments. It's not gonna, I mean, not to say it won't completely go away, but it's not just the be all end all. It's a process. And like you're saying, and I love that you said, be gentle with yourself. Because I think, in an athletics sphere, we can tend to be pretty hard on ourselves. So definitely have that self appreciation, that gentleness and compassion for yourself. So to kind of wrap things up, if anyone listening to this or watching this are interested in receiving more information from you guys, where would they be able to find you?
I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. You can look me up on LinkedIn, Lauren Sander. I'm on social media, JMU Sports Med. Duke's Let's Talk is the peer support group that I facilitate. So if you want to look at the things that I'm talking about with my student athletes, you can follow that. And then Lauren Sander on Instagram. I don't tweet much these days.
Me either. I don't tweet much either these days. Still my news source. Still one of my top news sources, but I'm a lurker now. So I can be found at sports, food, and mental health is my Instagram handle. That is all things exactly what it says. So I don't think in my introduction, I didn't talk about what I work with specifically, but I work with athletes with eating disorders, high anxiety, perfectionism, and other controlling type behaviors. And so at Sports, Food, and Mental Health is my primary account, and I kind of let someone else take care of most of what looks pretty. So I think I also have a website, but we're working on it. It might be under construction right now, at the same name. And what is really cool about my position now is I freaking love working with athletics. I just don't want to coach anymore, but I am so invested in the world of athletics. And so right now focuses on athletes, but having this conversation and lots of other conversations, I know that there will be some stuff coming from me that will be more focused towards coaches, because it is a missing demographic in the world of athletics for sure that we're not paying attention to.
Well, thank you both for being a part of this conversation. I'm very excited for everyone to hear what you guys had to say and hear this. Like we've said from the start, And like you just said, Cindy, I think this is definitely a conversation that's been missing from um, the mental health conversation as a whole in athletics. And I mean, that was our goal with this program, was to kind of address that demographic and hopefully have this conversation so that, like we've been saying all night, we can create this example for our student athletes while also taking care of ourselves as coaches and professionals. So thank you guys so much for sitting on this panel, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.